Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Maritime Law, or the Law of the Sea, also known as Admiralty Law. Okay, I'm going to draw a distinction between the law of the land and the law of the sea. I'm going to draw a distinction between constitutional law and maritime law. I'm going to try to do that a number of ways. But first, let me just tell you that I am not a lawyer. I never attempted to take the bar exam. I did not attend law school. And this makes me eminently qualified to discuss legal matters. This is not to say I haven't been in a courtroom. I have been in a courtroom as a jury, in an alternate jury status. I have been a witness in a criminal case. I have been a witness in a civil case. I have been an expert witness in a civil case. All right. I have performed litigation support services for lawyers involved with civil lawsuits. I have participated in forensic audits in criminal matters of embezzlement and malfeasance. And I've also been a defendant in a criminal court. All right. So I feel that I'm more qualified than your average lawyer who's never even seen the inside of a courtroom, okay? And let me assure you right now, they practice maritime law in all the state superior courts. They do. As a practical matter, it's 100% maritime law, okay? There's a few exceptions, very few, and I'm going to call them immaterial. All right, and you do know that under maritime law, you are not allowed to have a jury. The judge decides. And when I say the judge decides, the lawyers decide, and then the judge agrees. That's how it works. In other words, they have secret private meetings. They bully their clients, and they come up with whatever they decide in the parking lot or at a golf course country club or in a conference room at a law office. But absolutely nothing is decided in a courtroom. Ever. And for all you lawyers out there that want to deny this, go ahead. I mean, nobody believes you anyway. I mean, how can you tell when a lawyer is lying? When their lips are moving. That's how you can tell when a lawyer is lying. All right? I mean, that's a joke, but the reason it's funny is because it's truthful and accurate. See, it wouldn't be funny if it weren't true. So lawyers have zero credibility. Hey, here's another lawyer joke. You want to hear a joke? What do you call a bus full of lawyers that drives off a cliff 3,000 feet down that has one empty bench in the back? You call that a tragedy. You call that a tragedy when there's an empty seat. That's a serious joke that's funny because it's true. All right, let's take a few things up front here. The law of the land has to do with terra firma, all right? And peoples generally create communities, cities, and townships on the land, all right? 70% of the world that we live in, and I'm not talking to the flat earthers here, I'm talking to people that believe in the globe. So a little bit more than 70% of the earth is occupied by water, okay? That's not counting the lakes and the rivers. I'm just counting the oceans. It's about 71% is covered with water, all right? And this is why maritime law is the preeminent law on the planet Earth. Constitutional law sort of grew out of civil laws of civilizations. Constitutional law is a body of law that defines the role, powers, and structure of different entities within a state government, the executive or parliamentary or judicial and legal judiciary, what their rights are, as well as the basic rights of the citizens in the federal districts or counties of, for example, the United States or Canada. The relationship between a central government and a state provisional or territorial governments is defined under constitutional law. Not all nations have codified constitutions, though all such states have the law of the land that may be consistent with a variety of imperative and consensual rules. These may include customary laws, conventions, statutory laws, judge-made laws, international rules, or norms. Okay, so wanted to get that out on the table. Most nations, such as the United States, India, or Singapore, constitutional law is based upon the text of a document that was ratified at the time that that nation came into existence. Other nations, most notably the United Kingdom, which we sometimes call Merry Old England, they rely heavily on uncodified rules and several legislative statutes and constitutional conventions. Their status within constitutional law varies, and the terms and conventions in some cases are strongly contested. Let me translate that for you. England is ambiguous, but it functions under maritime law. They like to tell their citizens, or I believe they call them subjects, the subjects of their monarchy/democracy, sort of like France had, right? You have the king, and then you have the nobility class, and you have the peasant class, and then you have the high priests. The high priest used to be the Catholic Church, but we'll call them the superior court judges, justices. Anyway, you have this ambiguous system in England, so nobody really knows what the law is in England. But you know what? Nobody knows what the law is in the United States either, so don't feel bad to my loyal United Kingdom audience. You are not my subjects. You are free-thinking noblemen. All right, so what I'm trying to tell you is, less than 30% of the world is on the land. And in the case of America and Canada, which is kind of a joke, and United Kingdom, which is definitely a joke with your Royal Academy of Art, and New York, which is a joke because we have the Actors Studio in Manhattan. Not to mention we have actor studios throughout the United States. So anyway, what I wanted to tell you is this concept of a constitution is eroded over time because Congress, or the Parliament, we call it Congress here, the House of Senate, the nobility, and the House of Commoners, which we call the House of Representatives, combined they're known as the Congress. Anyway, they pass laws. They're a legislative branch of government. And they pass statutes which can be enforced, which modify, change, and weaken the United States Constitution as originally conceived by our forefathers, who did not permit women to vote, nor did they permit indentured servants to vote, nor did they allow people who couldn't read to vote. So when we talk about the democracy of of America, you're talking about a nobility class controlled bank district. Basically, we got a franchise from the Bank of London. That's what we had. And we've never deviated ever. Not ever. All right, so we had torts, which torts are civil violations. They're civil wrongs. And they can cause loss or harm. Typically, that has to do with loss of property, loss of finance, loss of money. But I'm here to tell you that that torts can be felonies, criminal felonies. They can be. And I'll give you some examples. But first, let's review the 5 elements of what constitutes a contract under contract law within the construct of constitutional law. You cannot really have contract law unless you have some kind of a constitution in force, because the Constitution provides for courts to settle differences and disputes. And if you don't have enforceability capability, then you can't really have contracts. All right, so everybody knows the 5 elements of a contract, right? Okay, let's review. It means agreement. First element of a contract is you must have agreement. That means there's an offer and an acceptance. All right? So that's agreement. Number 2 is valuable consideration needs to be paid. It doesn't have to be paid up front. It could be paid on an installment basis, or it could even be paid at the conclusion of the contract. according to performance. If it's a performance-based contract, valuable consideration must be paid within the contract terms. Number 3, there must be legality of the contract. In other words, it must be enforceable, presumably in a court of law. That's not the technical definition ever. It just means enforceable. So we hear the term of taking out a contract on people. Well, normally that's not enforceable in a court of law. However, it might be enforceable by somebody, like the clandestine services. Then there must be, the 4th element of a contract is legal capacity of the parties to the contract. That means they must be of the age of consent in their district of the contract, and that they are of sound mind or legal capacity to make rational decisions. So they must be competent, and they must be generally over age 18. Or you'll need a parental co-signer. For example, Sharon Tate required her mother and father's signature on her contract with Filmways, which was a subcontract from MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, and CBS Television, Columbia Broadcasting System. Her contract was co-signed by her parents. I believe she was 18 years old when she signed that contract in Culver City, California, but nevertheless her parents also co-signed her 7-year contract, which she apparently did not renew because they bayoneted her to death when she was 26 years old and was pregnant, so she couldn't be booked for work. And the 5th element of a legalized contract would be compliance with the statute of frauds. Statute of frauds are something that evolves and changes and came along later as technology grew, transportation systems became introduced. So there's a whole series of statute of frauds requirements of certain contracts. Like your cell phone contract, for example. It's supposed to be in conformity with the statute of frauds because it involves the FCC and radio frequencies. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek because if you've looked at your cellular mobile phone contracts or your cable television contracts, you can't read the print. It's invisible. And according to Melvin Belli, who was a CIA attorney who lived on Broadway in San Francisco, where Diane Goldman Feinstein lives, where the Paul Pelosi fake hammer attack that never happened, Broadway. It's part of the U.S. Marines, part of the United States Army Presidio base is Broadway. Yes, Broadway goes directly into the Army base, where Letterman Hospital and Bioweapons Laboratory is located. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is Abigail Folger's mother lives on that street too, Ines Mejia. She's passed away at age 100. But she lived on Broadway in close proximity to Melvin Belli. And Melvin Belli said that invisible contracts or contracts with print so small that you can't read them with a magnifying glass are torts on their face, meaning they're a civil wrong and they're a violation of our public policy, and that they may cause harm or loss. If you can't read the terms of your contract, you have committed a tort violation. So I would suggest to you folks that virtually all the contracts of the College of Corporations in America are unenforceable contracts because they're in violation of basic tort civil wrongs. Anyway, good luck with that, because I've canceled cell phone contracts and they just keep trying to charge your bank account. You have to go to the bank and have them deny those automatic withdrawals or close your account, and then making it impossible for the corporation to bill the account. I mean, you have to go to a lot of work to get out of a corporation who's not listening to you, not paying attention to you, and will not allow you to cancel their contract. All right. You should know that under maritime law, you are not permitted any kind of a jury. The judge decides. So, why am I telling you this? Because that's exactly what they do in the state of California. 97 to 98% of all criminal cases in California end in plea agreements, okay? And in federal court, it's 99.999% in federal court are decided by a plea agreement, okay? Because it's too expensive to go too long, so you just agree. You capitulate. You capitulate. That's what a plea agreement is. The judge will ask you if you signed your plea agreement under duress. And if you say anything other than no, then they invalidate the process and your plea agreement is kicked back to the curb and you got to start over again. But all plea agreements are signed under duress. The question is an oxymoron. You would never sign a plea agreement voluntarily. Ever. It means that your rights don't exist. That's what it means. It means you don't have the right to confront your accuser. It means that you can't call witnesses. You cannot present evidence. And anytime you're in a situation where you can't confront your accuser and you're denied the ability to ask questions or call your own witnesses and present evidence, I mean, you have no rights. I mean, you're just a cog in a sausage machine. And whether you're innocent or guilty, when you're put through the sausage machine, it comes out, it all looks the same. That's what we call maritime law. That's what I call maritime law. I call it a sausage machine. So again, you don't get a jury. And in California, in Superior Court, you don't get a jury. 97% of the time, you don't get a jury. So the whole thing is a charade. That's why they had Perry Mason. That's why they had Peter Fox Colombo, to give you a matrix of programming of what does not exist. Basically, the Colombo genre of the how do I catch him? I mean, all of his defendants, all of his arrests are going to result in charges will be dropped, okay? All right? Because they're influential people. There really is no evidence. And it's fun for television. There is no detective at any municipal police department or sheriff's office who's going to dedicate that kind of time to one case. No way. They work 24 to 36 cases at a time. So there's no way that anyone spends full time on one case. And Perry Mason always has innocent clients. Well, that almost never happens in real life either. I mean, there are a lot of innocent clients, but they're found guilty. They sign a plea agreement. The innocent clients sign plea agreements. The guilty clients may go to a jury trial because they're being charged with, 50 years in prison or life without parole. And so, why not go to trial? You got nothing to lose. The only people that go to trial are people who haven't been offered a plea agreement that's remotely decent, right? So you go to trial. All right, I want to give you some examples of maritime law, which applies to the oceans, and it also applies, it's been expanded to the river system. So over here in the North American continent, we have the St. Lawrence River, we have the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, we've got Lake Ontario, we've got the Ohio River, we've got the Mississippi River, right? And you can run barges on these waterways. And that is all covered now under maritime law. The port facilities. In America, we have at least 266 port facilities. They're all covered under maritime law. That includes Dallas, Texas, which is a railroad hub. Okay? And it's not just Long Beach and Seattle and the Port of Oakland or the World Trade Center, the Port of New York. It's not just that. It's not just port authorities in New Orleans or Miami. It's anything to do with intermodal transportation. So that's trucking, which Paul McCartney would know about because his third wife's family is in the intermodal transportation business, and she's Jewish. Okay? So Paul McCartney knows about maritime law because he's married to a woman who derives income from maritime law compliance. She's in the trucking business. So we're talking about the railroad tracks. We're talking about any crime that occurs on a railroad track. We're talking about the canal systems. We're talking about big and small canal systems. We're talking about the port authorities. We're talking about the Tennessee Valley Authority, That's a waterway system that can be used for recreation. Recreational use of waterways is covered under maritime law. Yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. Even in a courtroom, they have a railing that they call the bar. Okay? And a bar means weight or railing. It also can figuratively or metaphorically apply to a whole body of lawyers or the legal profession as a whole. In other words, they've all passed the bar. But there is this slippery thing that's called officer of court status, which I have a major problem with because it creates a conflict of interest that can never be resolved. Officer of the court status applies to the judge. It applies to all the lawyers who practice in front of the judge who are recognized as being members of the bar and who can appear in front of the judge, and the paralegals who assist the lawyers who are not lawyers themselves, but they are part of the legal teams. It also applies to the stenographer who's taking notes and stops typing when the judge puts their hand out like this, like I've seen them do, so that there is not a record of what is said in the courtroom. You see? Don't you find it ironic that they have a stenographer in the courtrooms to keep a record of everything that goes on in the courtroom, but not everything that goes on in the courtroom appears on the transcript? Do you find that unethical? I do. Because I think the most important things that happen in a courtroom are not in the transcripts. Now, officer of the court status does not apply to the bailiff, which is typically the sheriff's department or federal officers. They are not technically officer of the court status as a practical matter. However, as a how do I get along with people? They are part of it. So if a deputy hears somebody in the hallway say something, he'll rat them out to one of the lawyers or the judge. Yeah, they will. So don't ever say anything in the hallway that's nearby a bailiff, okay? That's why you're never going to have an honest conversation in a jail. For all the naive people that might be listening, you're not going to go visit David Berkowitz or the son of Sam in prison or Charlie Manson in Corcoran prison and have a sit-down conversation. The only way you're going to be able to talk to those guys is you write a check and you do some kind of a scripted interview that the warden and the prison looks at in advance. You know, like Geraldo, whose real name is Jerry Rivers, like he might do. But you're not going to ever get the truth, ever, because the truth is not allowed incarcerated. It's not allowed in a courtroom, and it is not allowed in the jail, and it is not allowed in a prison. You cannot speak the truth. It's not allowed in a parole hearing. So you wonder why Patricia Krenwinkel and Charlie Watson and Leslie Van Houten don't protest their innocence. It's because they'll be denied food or they'll be poisoned, right? They have a lot to lose. They have their life to lose. So that's why they don't profess their innocence. They certainly would be denied parole if they did that. They're denied parole anyway, so I'm just letting you know there's other reasons than being denied parole that go on in an incarcerated setting. All right, now having said this, I want to give you a real life example of what I'm talking about, and then we'll end the video. So, since I've now described the territories of maritime law as being the port facilities that will ship or receive containers and put them on trucks or railroad cars, then they go to, hub transportation, hub and circle models, like to Dallas, Texas, or to Chicago and Cincinnati, Ohio, is that the use of waterways, rivers, canals, railroad tracks, United States highway, interstates, all are subject to maritime law. I find it more than ironic to give you these examples right now of people who were murdered under maritime law. So let's go back to February 15th, 1898, and the sinking of the USS Maine in the port of Havana, Cuba, which at that time was fully controlled by the United States Marines. Okay? That's why they moored the USS Maine there. You're not gonna moor a battleship in a foreign dock without 24/7 guards. All right. Anyway, on February 15th, 1898, the USS Maine exploded, killing 266 Navy seamen. All right. That was in 1898, February 15th. That's covered under maritime law. They never caught the murderers, never caught them. It did launch the Spanish-American War, which constructed the Guantanamo base 50 miles by 50 miles square Navy facility at the east end of the island, and made total control of Cuba as a colony of the United States. And they invaded the Philippine Islands also simultaneously as a result of the false flag attack and the murdering of 266 innocent seamen. Then let's go up to December 7th, 1941. We had Pearl Harbor, very similar to the USS Maine. We had we're not at war. None of these murders are occurring during a war. These are all peacetime murders. USS Maine, 1898. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, killing approximately 2,400, mostly Navy seamen. All right. And they never caught the killers. They never caught the killers on that, which I would say is Navy intelligence. Because, look, if you can send 6 aircraft carriers from Japan 3,000 miles to Honolulu and not notice, you deserve to be arrested. You call yourself an intelligence organization? Give me a break. And you'll notice that the Japanese didn't take out the power grid at Honolulu, did they? I mean, that would have been the first thing I would have done, is take out the power communication centers. I'd have done that first. I don't care about the USS Arizona and Oklahoma. They're World War I battleships. Who cares? They have no strategic value in the War of the Pacific. None. So you notice all the things that were destroyed were worthless, except the men. The men were valuable, but they were sacrificed under maritime law. All right, then we had the John Kennedy assassination at Dealey Plaza, where the shot that blew his brains out came from the triple underpasses. Well, guess what? Those are railroad tracks that feed into the railroad yard, which is part of the port facility under maritime law for the United States. Those railroad tracks go to New Orleans, they go to Los Angeles, they go to Long Beach, Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles, they go to Chicago. It is a hub in the maritime port facility. And they never caught the killer of John Kennedy, did they? No, they never did. The person who pulled the trigger that blew his brains out, they never caught him. They didn't catch the conspirators either. All right, then 11 months later, Mary Pinchot Meyer, who had just put down the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission and was fuming angry, living in Georgetown, the swamp, Washington, D.C., she's murdered on October 14th, 1964. She was married to Cord Meyer for 13 years. He's a executive deputy director of CIA working under Allen Dulles. Cord Meyer, and he has a out-of-control loose cannon with his ex-wife, Mary Pinchot Meyer, of nobility class. Anyway, she's walking along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath when she's shot in the head, execution style. Or she's shot a couple times, she falls to the ground, then the coup de grace to her head. So she's murdered, and they never caught the killer. And you know that Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath is under maritime law. They caught a scapegoat, and they couldn't convict him. Of course, he was a black man, homeless. Then, on September 11, 2001, we had the World Trade Center destruction of what is a port facility. You do realize that those buildings, I think there's 12 buildings at the World Trade Center, that's within the Port of New York, which is part of maritime law. And we never caught the killers of 9/11, did we? No, we didn't. Nor did we catch the conspirators who blew up those buildings. We never caught them. And we destroyed the crime scene, didn't we? Yeah, we did. We destroyed the crime scene, which means there has never been a comprehensive investigation or analysis of the World Trade Center destruction, because the crime scene was destroyed under maritime law, which doesn't care about your opinions or a jury, that they just decided in secret. That's what maritime law, right? So that's why we didn't catch anybody. We didn't. We didn't catch anybody. Osama bin Laden, he works for CIA, and I don't think he was involved. But anyway, whatever. I never saw the body. All right, then let's go out to San Francisco by the Bay, my good old gift that keeps on giving, the Haight-Ashbury Project, which was fully operational from the CIA. And on August 1st, 1966, George Sullivan was shot with a .38 policeman's pistol in the port of San Francisco, like 2 blocks from the water. And he had just signed a deal with Bill Graham, not his real name, Wolf Grajanka, who's a Jew from the Bronx via Germany. Bill Graham is a name that came out of a New York telephone book. Wolf Grajanka signed a deal for a lease of the Fillmore Auditorium from George Sullivan, who controlled that lease. And George Sullivan was then quickly murdered in a Port Authority of San Francisco and never caught the killer. All right, then let's go out to 1989, and we had Huey Newton, who is the president of the Black Panthers. He's killed in the port of Oakland, which is across the East Bay Bridge, and he's killed 2.5 blocks from the port containerization gate for the Port of Oakland. That was on August 22nd, 1989. Now, it coincides with the murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez, which was 2 days before, on August 20th, 1989. I didn't count Jose Menendez, although he had intermodal transportation expertise in Cicero and Chicago, Illinois, because he was the CEO of a container company up there, intermodal transportation. He knows all about maritime law, and he was murdered in Beverly Hills, 90210 at 722 North Elm Drive, in a home that he didn't live in. It's Michael Jackson's home, was Elton John's home, and it became Columbo creator William Link's home after they cleaned up all the blood. Then Columbo creator William Link moved in. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there because there seems to be a lot of murders in August. We had George Sullivan murdered August 1st, 1966. Huey Newton murdered in the Port of Oakland in August 1989. Then we had Tony David Leighton Scott, a Hollywood director-producer living in Benedict Canyon off Cielo Drive. August 19th, 2012. He drives his car down to San Pedro, which is where Fort MacArthur used to be, where the Terminal Island prison is that Charlie Miles Maddox was kept for a while. Twice, 2 different trips there. And he apparently swan dives off the Vincent Thomas Bridge, which is in the Port Authority of Los Angeles. It's part of the Port of Long Beach. It's part of the Port of Los Angeles, which is covered under maritime law. And they found some antidepressants supposedly in his body. But, hey, I don't know if he was tossed over or he swan dived on his own. We've got conflicting witness testimony. There's conflicting witnesses. So I'm going to call those crisis actors. And we don't have any definitive witnesses that say there was 3 guys that threw him over like Diane Linklater or Frank Olson out of his 11th floor of the Shoreham Tower or Statler Hotel in Manhattan. All right. Anyway, those murders that I just told you about, that's 5,610 people murdered under maritime law when we're not in war. We're not at war, and we just murdered 5,610 people under maritime law when we're not at war. Oh, I forgot the USS Liberty. I had that in there too. That's 34 naval seamen that were murdered by Israeli fighter pilots. That was on June 8th, 1967, when we weren't at war. However, we were busy spying. That was a spy ship, the USS Liberty, and 34 servicemen were killed. All right, so you add up World Trade Center, Pearl Harbor, those are the big ones. And then you throw in Tony or Anthony David Leighton Scott, whose brother is Ridley Scott, and you put Bill Graham in there and Huey Newton, and you put Mary P. Meyer and John Kennedy and Thomas Insay, who was friends with William Randolph Hearst and was celebrating his birthday on William Randolph Hearst's yacht when I believe he was killed on that yacht. And that would be under maritime law. William Randolph Hearst having a person mortally injured upon his yacht. Anyway, it's 5,610 deaths under maritime law when we're not at work. That's my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share and hit the like and subscribe. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.